Good morning, everybody. My name is David Kowalczyk. I am a professor of philosophy and humanities at Vanyu College. Before I present this morning's speaker, I would like to just quickly thank the Humanities Symposium Committee for organizing this annual event. This is a tricky event to organize because it takes place over the course of an entire week. We have quite a few speakers, and so quite a bit of effort goes into coordinating these events and making sure that we get as many students and other professors participating as possible. Especially, I'd like to extend a big thanks to Lily Petrovich, who has been this year's coordinator and who has been, pretty incredible at organizing this hybrid event, between events taking place online and events taking place in person. So thank you, Lily. So this morning we welcome John Eastwood, who is associate professor in the Department of Psychology at York University. For those of you who are not familiar with it, for some reason, this is in Toronto. Professor Eastwood is also co-author of a book entitled Out of My Skull, The Psychology of Boredom, which is the topic we're discussing today. He conducts clinical research on the relationship between cognition and emotion. Today's presentation on boredom will be examining various kinds of psychological aspects of the experience and is co-authored with Amanda Wyman, who is a master's student in the clinical psychology program also at York University. Please welcome Professor John Eastwood.
Really excited to be here with you today about my favorite topic of boredom. So, as you heard, the title of my talk is Listen to Boredom, Reclaim Your Life. I want to talk to you today about transitions, critical turning points. Life is big and small transitions. As young adults, you're in the middle of some important life changes. Will you pursue further education or launch an exciting career? Change is in the air. When it comes to boredom, I have some bad news and some good news. Right now, you're experiencing peak boredom. That's the bad news. Boredom levels peak when people are in their late teens, but it's about to change for the better. Statistically, boredom will become less menacing as you age, and that's the good news. While you're here, though, in peak boredom, it's important to figure out how to respond to boredom. The lessons we can learn from boredom are especially timely. I should start by being clear on what I mean by boredom. How do I define it? Boredom is the state of wanting but being unable to engage in satisfying activity. When bored, our mind is unengaged and we're caught in a desire bind, both wanting to be doing something and not wanting to do anything that's available. It could be said that boredom is a crisis of self-determination. Simply put, this means we are not engaged in activity that flows from and gives expression to our desires and our capabilities. You could say we're not authoring our lives. Instead, when bored, we become a passive object. Now, I'm sure I don't have to tell you that boredom feels bad or that it can drive people to some dark and crazy places. Indeed, many of the problems associated with boredom are likely a result of trying to get rid of the feeling. Overeating, risk-taking, absent-minded errors, addictions of various sorts, as well as aggressive anger and depression have all been associated with boredom. As we heard earlier this morning, one line of research has even shown that boredom can lead people to administer electrical shocks to themselves. So it all seems pretty grim. And in many ways it is, but it doesn't have to be. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. All feelings have a message for us. We need to listen to our feelings. As we'll see, it's open to future suffering. The point is not to be bored. It's not a feeling to cultivate.
Sorry, Dr. Eastwood. Dr. Eastwood, we're just going to interrupt you for 1 second because we're having some static on your end. Do you know what it is that's causing the static there? It's interfering with your voice.
I think it might be your microphone rubbing on your shirt.
Okay, I could take the microphone off.
No, we're not hearing you yet. Might have to change your audio settings.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, perfect.
Yes.
Thank you.
You want me to continue from here, or how much was my voice interfered with? Should I need to start from the beginning or continue from here?
No, actually, do you know what the problem is, Carlos? No?
You don't need to start from the beginning, but we're actually hearing it again. So is it something else?
Yeah. Can you sorry, just keep talking for a little bit?
All feelings have a message for us. We need to listen to our feelings, including boredom. As we'll see, ignoring or running from boredom only leaves us open to future suffering. The point is not to be bored. It's not a feeling to cultivate, but rather the point is that listening to boredom can help us thrive. It can be a launching pad to something better if we hear its message. But we must properly understand what boredom is trying to tell us and then respond appropriately. We must learn how to transition out of boredom to a better place. There's a lot of confusion and mixed messages about boredom. In part, it's because people are using the term boredom to mean different things. And partly because it's just complicated. When I get asked about boredom, people typically want to know, is it good to be bored? This is an important but complicated question. We can learn a lot, though, by unpacking the question. So what exactly are we asking when we consider whether it's good to be bored? First, we might be wondering whether it's good to be in a situation that tends to cause boredom. We know that environments which do not attract and hold our attention can be boring, monotony being the key culprit. However, in such moments, even when it seems that there is nothing to do, there is still a possibility of becoming engaged with our thoughts and our feelings. Of course, turning from an external to an internal focus is not simple, and some struggle more than others. There's great value, however, in developing what Bernardino Yang refers to as constructive internal reflection. In moments of internal focus, we make sense of our experience, review our past, and form plans. Such reflection allows us to go beyond what is concretely happening to consider the significance and the meaning of events. When strong external demands on our attention fade away, as is the case with boring situations, we are free to turn inward. In fact, Bernardino Yang argues for the need to deliberately spend time in environments that place minimal external demands on our attention so we can develop the ability to successfully turn inward. However, this is important. However, the key point here is that when we're internally focused, we're not bored because our mind is now engaged with our thoughts and our feelings. So we might say it's good to be in potentially boring situations without becoming bored, because this creates the opportunity for us to strengthen our capacity for and enjoy the benefits of constructive internal reflection. Alternatively, when considering whether or not it's good to be bored, we might be wondering about the feeling of boredom. Is it good to feel bored? Pain serves as a good parallel here. It's a good thing that it feels painful when our body is damaged. If we did not feel discomfort, we might not stop and fix the problem. So we might say that it is good that it feels bad when our body is damaged. But it's not good to have our body damaged. All feelings alert us to how we are in the world. Feelings tell us if we should stop and make a course correction or keep on doing what we're doing. Fear, for example, tells us that we are in danger and need to seek safety. Sadness tells us that we've lost something of value that we need to restore. The parallel to boredom would be to say that it's good that boredom feels bad because it alerts us to a problem and it motivates us to make a change. So in what way then is it a problem to be bored? The answer to this question will of course depend on how you understand boredom's underlying conditions. Earlier, I defined boredom as the state of wanting but being unable to engage in satisfying activity, what I called a crisis of self-determination. When bored, the plan to action cycle has stalled. It's as if we are stuck and can't launch into action. But calling boredom a crisis of self-determination implies that boredom is an important and decisive turning point, which can lead to danger or opportunity. The outcome hinges on how we hear and respond to boredom. All too often, boredom is simply heard as a call to do something different or to find better entertainment. However, boredom presents an opportunity when we can hear its deeper challenge to us. That deeper challenge is an invitation to reclaim our self-determination. When the plan to action cycle is humming along, we hardly notice ourselves. We just get on with doing. While engaged, we don't stop to ask, what am I doing and why? For example, perhaps at the start, you carefully considered a particular program of study at school. But then you got busy. You got carried along by activity. Now you're dragged out of bed by the alarm just in time to get to your first class. The day's marching orders are laid out by upcoming assignments and tests. Calendar invites remind you to rush home for a Zoom meeting with your cousin. And then finally, at the end of the day, fatigue draws you back to bed. Technology can also control and direct our attention. From infinite scrolling to the reinforcement of social media likes, we get lost, swept along with the clicking and scrolling. For large portions of our day, it's as if we've outsourced our self-determination and slipped into autopilot. Boredom is the autopilot kill switch. When bored, everything comes crashing to a halt. We become self-focused and aware of our inability to decide and act on our intentions. It's not at all a pleasant place to be, but here's the opportunity within the danger. It allows us to take back the reins once again. Boredom because it involves a stoppage in the plan to action cycle of doing, provides an opportunity to pause, reflect, and reaffirm our self-determination. Psychoanalytic writers suggest the bored person is like someone who has forgotten and is trying to remember a name. It's on the tip of their tongue, tantalizingly close, but just refuses to come into focus. Was it Melissa, Marissa? No, that's not right. Ah, yes, it was Larissa. Similarly, the bored person restlessly tries out different activities, not merely to find something that satisfies, but to use the environment as a support for clarifying what it is that they want to do, for discovering and then expressing their self-determination. The bored person is pushed towards the environment to find themselves through interaction with the world. So boredom can be an opportunity to take an inventory of values, passion, curiosity, and abilities that we're keen to express. But we can't short circuit the process. We can't force it. We might have to wait patiently for our passions to come into focus. The need for patience is hardly surprising. Busy demands of life and attention-controlling technology may have carried us along for so long that we've lost touch with what we care about. And this may in part be the reason that we're so dogged by boredom. So we might say, yes, brief moments of boredom can be helpful, but only insofar as these moments serve as a transaction back to engagement rooted in enhanced self-determination. In this way of thinking, boredom can be understood as a liminal space. A liminal space is a transition from one place to another. Liminal spaces are not the destination, but rather places that allow for transitions between one destination and the next. Consider a stairwell, for example. There's nothing to be gained by lingering in a stairwell, but only by going through a stairwell can we get from one floor to another. Stairwells have value because they allow for transitions. To push the metaphor a little further, consider a hallway, another kind of liminal space, which appears to lead nowhere. Stuck in such a hallway, we're likely to be overcome with feelings of uncertainty, doubt, and confusion. In such a situation, we might look for the nearest exit rather than seeing the journey through. Liminal moments can be unsettling and disorienting, but they prepare the way for what is to come. So the point is not to seek out or cultivate boredom. Rather, the point is to recognize it as a passageway to somewhere new. When bored, or old goals have already run their course, but we've not yet given ourselves over to a new goal. However, and here's the danger inherent in boredom. The uncomfortable feeling of boredom can be silenced without addressing the root cause, sort of a remedy without cure. Just like taking a painkiller can mask the feeling of pain without fixing the problem, so too we can blunt the feeling of boredom without enhancing our self-determination. Unfortunately, this is often what happens. Boredom feels bad, so as if in an interminable hallway, we take the closest off-ramp rather than seeing things through. Partly the issue is that boredom feels bad, so we want it to end as quickly as possible. And partly the issue is that we think about the situation in the wrong way, or we fail to hear boredom's message to us. We think the problem is that we simply lack compelling, entertaining experience, rather than recognizing our need to become self-determined. And so we seek to consume novelty and excitement rather than looking for ways to enhance our self-determination. The key to unlocking the opportunity in boredom and avoiding the danger lies in our response. Once we've heard boredom as a call to self-determination, then we need to respond wisely when boredom strikes. So boredom can help you become more self-determined, but only if you respond well. So how should you respond to boredom? The specific answer will be personal. I can't answer for you, and that's exactly the point. It must be your solution. But research findings do suggest some principles that can be of help as you move out of boredom by enhancing your self-determination. And learning to make the transition from weak to strong self-determination will help with more than just boredom. It's a critical life skill worth cultivating. So step one, stay calm, keep your emotional balance. You've probably heard the saying, what you resist will not only persist, but it will grow in size. So changing your attitude can help. Take a breath, regain your composure, step out of the turmoil. This too will pass. Try to see boredom for what it is, an uncomfortable but helpful pointer back to a life well lived. Research shows that you will suffer less when you shift out of a fighting or anxious mode and simply acknowledge your uncomfortable feelings. This will set the stage for accessing your self-determination in order to climb out of boredom. Secondly, self-reflect. Use boredom as an opportunity to rediscover yourself. Then, armed with a renewed understanding of who you are, what you care about, and what you're good at, launch back into engaged action based on that new understanding. Now you know what matters to you, and ultimately, this promotes a greater capacity for self-determination. If you're struggling to find what matters to you, it might be helpful to generate a list of personal values. Anything from strong family bonds, professional success, adventure, social justice, financial independence, or just improving your knowledge in some domain. Then generate actionable goals that further these personal values. You might also stop to consider when you felt most effective and capable in the past, and then look for similar opportunities to express yourself in that way again. Choose to be curious and let the world be your guide. Use boredom as an opportunity to discover something new. This is the flip side of looking inward and acting based on self-awareness. When bored, we can also engender curiosity and go to the world to discover, including discoveries about ourselves and what matters to us and what we're good at. Discovering something new about ourselves helps clarify our goals, and acting for the sake of discovery moves us towards stronger self-determination. Be optimistic. This goes hand in hand with curiosity. Try to focus on the possible rewards of the different things that you could be doing. If you can muster up even just a smidgen of enthusiasm or excitement for the possibilities, then you already have boredom on the ropes. Self-determination is about acting on the world based on your desires and intentions, and having something positive to aim for can be very helpful. Commit to pay attention. Simply making the choice to focus on something gives it value, and that's how self-determination is strengthened. You've made a choice and assigned value. Also, paying close attention to something can make it interesting. The artist Andy Warhol famously claimed that you have to let the little things that would ordinarily bore you suddenly thrill you. Boredom can't get entrenched when you commit yourself to pay attention. Self-determination is enhanced when we are in control and acting on the basis of our desires. Challenge yourself. Be open to challenge. It often seems that all things being equal, we prefer to sit on the couch, the law of least effort. In reality, though, we need an optimal amount of challenge, the Goldilocks zone. When an activity doesn't challenge us, our attention drifts off. Too challenging, and we can't get into it. Either way, we're left bored. Research shows that if you spend half an hour doing homework, you'll actually be less bored than if you spend half an hour on social media. And you'll be more bored after a half hour of social media than you were before you picked up your phone. Maybe that's why we can't ever seem to put our phones down. The right amount of challenge will allow us to engage our minds and express our abilities, which are central to self-determination. Focus on the why. One way out of boredom is to change your perspective. You can do this by trying to come up with a few reasons why an activity is in line with your values or goals, even if that's not how you currently feel. Does the assignment give you the chance to practice a new skill that might be useful for some future job that you're interested in? Is the activity giving you a chance to sharpen your thinking in some way that you care about? If you can find your own reason for doing something, you're taking a big step towards self-determination. Take control and be the boss. You can take ownership of something that you have to do and make it your own. If you've got a list of tasks, decide in what order you're going to do them in. If you've got a project think about what topic that you want to learn more about. Ask yourself how you can make this work for me. Can you make a game out of it? For instance, if you're stuck doing a highly repetitive task, you could try to beat your best time, your personal time on the activity. Or if you're completing a school project on what you consider to be a dull topic, you could think about yourself as a detective working the clues and figuring out the case. Research shows that people who modify a task to make it their own, people who come up with their own ways of making a task interesting, or even just simply set the goal of doing their best on an activity, will become more engaged by it. Finally, just do it. Avoid paralysis by analysis. Don't get preoccupied with doing the best thing. This will prevent you from ever getting started. People who often get bored fixate on their current situation, hesitate to make change, and easily lose sight of their guiding North Star. Setting yourself unrealistic goals won't help either. Writing the world's next great novel to compete with War and Peace is daunting and not at all realistic. What you choose to do has to matter to you, but that doesn't mean it has to be grandiose. To avoid this happening to you, once you have some goals in mind, whether big or small, just do it. Get on with those activities. Boredom feels bad. So when it shows up, we look for the quickest exit. But all feelings have a message for us. We need to listen to our feelings, including boredom. Ignoring or running from boredom only leaves us open to future suffering. The point is not to be bored. It's not a feeling to cultivate, but rather the point is that listening to boredom can help us thrive. It can be a launching pad to something better if we can hear its challenge to us. Reclaim your self-determination. Responding well when boredom strikes can help us live fuller and richer lives. Thank you for your attention. I'm eager to see if there are any questions or comments.
Thank you, Professor Eastwood, for this great presentation. I'm very happy to having seen some other presentations this week and listened to some other arguments. It's great to also hear someone giving insights into how boredom can become a meaningful experience and how we can actually use it to respond to various kinds of circumstances in our lives. While we're waiting for questions from the audience, and from other people who tuned in for the online presentation. I have a question myself that connects with a presentation we saw earlier this week. So one of our guests, who was a professor of philosophy, focused his presentation very much on this question of agency, right? So his argument was essentially that boredom is an experience in which we feel constrained or stuck in a situation. And he then connected this also with socioeconomic conditions, right? So he tried to make a kind of a socioeconomic argument saying that people who tend to suffer from these kinds of certain kinds of constraints, feeling like they're stuck in a situation, tend to be people who feel powerless in society. And while we agreed with aspects of this argument, there was a bit of a debate that ensued. And a couple of people who were present pointed out that, the more traditional argument, which was that boredom could be seen as a problem of affluent societies. So in other words, we have societies with a large middle class or people with disposable incomes, people with more time on their hands, people get bored easier, right? And so they raised, so a couple of our questioners raised this issue. I also added to this by pointing out to another debate that's going on right now, which is about the cognitive changes that happen among younger people who, from a very young age, are spending time in front of screens, watching entertainment, which has kind of speeded up, has been speeded up in recent years. So they're watching cartoons and videos on TikTok and so on, where there's something going on all the time. So it seems like boredom is a kind of technologically created experience where they get bored faster when things are not happening all the time on the screen for them. And so it seems like we're stuck here with various ways of approaching boredom. We have the question of powerlessness, of being stuck in a situation. We have the question of maybe it's actually a socially culturally created phenomenon that has to do with too much time and too much, too much expectation. And then we have this very technologically cognitive kind of experience. And I'm wondering if you could comment on this, and if you have any insights you can contribute, because there's definitely some of the things you've mentioned today connect with at least some aspects of these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, thank you for that question. There's a lot there, and so let me try to make a few comments, and please follow up if there's some aspect of it that I haven't fully addressed. So I would say that it is most helpful to define boredom as an experience that an individual has. There is a conscious phenomenon, and it's called boredom. And then to ask what causes that feeling. And you can think about kind of immediate proximal causes, and you can think about more distal kinds of causes. So when I have a conscious feeling of boredom, something is happening in my mind, something is happening in my brain, something's happening in my body, and that is the immediate proximal psychological cause that's giving rise to the feeling. But we could say that boredom can be caused by both things in the environment, situational factors, and boredom is also caused by personality traits or personality characteristics. So we can list things that we know that are true about people's personality that make them more inclined to be bored. That can range from things like difficulty regulating their attention to having a hard time understanding emotions even. So there are a number of other things as well, but these are internal psychologically based causes of boredom. There can also be external based causes, right? Things in the environment, and those can be things that are happening right in the moment. I'm in a room with not a lot of opportunities for me to express my abilities or to find a way to have my mind engaged. We could also think about kind of sociocultural factors that might predispose people to feel bored more or less often, or to have slightly different experiences of boredom. So my personal view is that boredom is something that has been with us forever. It's part of the human condition. But how exactly I understand it and how I experience it and its precise flavor is going to change over time and over context and over culture. So I think there are many different causes of boredom, but I would argue that they all converge on the same psychological phenomenon. And so I think that you can acknowledge that maybe culture has had an impact on boredom. I think you can argue that maybe technology has had an impact, but I don't see these to be sort of competing accounts. I would say these are multiple determinant factors. And in my view, they all converge on this state of wanting but being unable to engage in activity. And that this is underpinned by both an unoccupied mind and a desire bind. These are the two immediate psychological factors. With respect to the impact of technology, the arguments that are made are certainly very plausible and make sense based on what we know about attention and what we know about technology. But in most cases, I think we just don't simply have enough data yet to say for sure if a steady diet of cartoons and fast action will cause boredom or cause us to be more susceptible to boredom. Those definitive studies have just, quite frankly, not been done yet. Very recently, a study came out suggesting that indeed there may be some evidence to say that people are experiencing boredom more often now than they did in the past. So we could point to perhaps some cultural factors that might have contributed to that. And when it comes to marginalized individuals, absolutely. We know that individuals who are marginalized are more likely to experience boredom, but there's lots of complicated ideas about why that might be the case. I wouldn't want people to simply say that's because their environments are impoverished. There can be a lot of other ways in which this can happen. You can think about the concept of epistemic injustice, for example, where certain people in society have perhaps not been given the ability to be recognized knowers. And this prevents their ability to be able to even perhaps put words to their own experience and to be able to label and understand them. We also can think about, who gets to decide what's a boring job and what's not a boring job and who gets boring jobs. And so it might be that by declaring a certain job boring, we are rendering certain people who perform those jobs bored. And so the issue of power and marginalization is a complex one. And it's not simply that people who don't have as many toys are more likely to be bored. So I feel like that was a bit of a ramble, but I hope I kind of addressed some of your points there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in other words, you're saying basically that it's perfectly fine in research to keep seeking this kind of more synchronized, more complex model for understanding boredom without seeing all of these different accounts as being contradictory.
Yes, and I think that these different accounts are often at the level of the cause of the experience. Not always, but often they are. And I believe they funnel into a common experience.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions?
Hi. Hi, Dr. Eastwood. Thank you so much for that. I really, really appreciate that. There's so many notes that I've taken. I think I'm going to take this list of what to do when you're bored. I'm going to write it all out. I'm going to put it like somewhere where everyone can see it, because I think it's so well done. It's so practical. It's so concrete. Everyone can understand it, and it just gives us, a couple of times this week we've asked the question, well, what can we do? And I feel like you've really given us a great set of tools for that. So first of all, I want to say thank you for your presentation. It was really illuminating, and I'm really glad to have heard it. And I like what you said. That I'm interested in what you said about boredom peaking in teenagehood. I'm glad it's not just my kids. I'm glad it's just not my students. That makes me not a bad mom and not a bad teacher, maybe. But I'm glad to hear that. And it does seem like teenagers are particularly vulnerable to this state. I think that you've explained very well why that's the case. Like, I think I have a better understanding of why that is, with things to do with agency and having to take control over your life. And it makes sense. But I was wondering, and this speaks a little bit to David's question, has it always been that way, or since we've been studying boredom, that there are certain times in your life where you're less and more bored? And I understand also that as we get older, I don't think that we necessarily become more wise, more aware, more in the moment, but we just get more distracted. I think that might be the reason why we're not as bored at 40 as we are at 20. And somebody said that this week. I don't remember who, but somebody said that we just get busy. So has it always been that way? Or since we've been studying boredom, has it always been the case that teenagers are more susceptible to this state? And you've just said that it's possible that technology has augmented this problem. So without going on anymore, is it something that is sort of in our development as human beings?
That's a good question. So I'm not aware of empirical research on boredom and its frequency or how common it is at different ages. I'm not aware of that going back very far in time. I think to answer that question, I guess you would need to pause and ask, well, why do I think people in early adulthood or late teenage years, why are they more prone to boredom? And there's a number of different ways you might explain that. One way that you could explain it is a more biological kind of explanation. And if you find this explanation compelling, then you might believe, well, perhaps then this has always been true. So the explanation would go something as follows. We know that people who struggle with boredom, or when people are in the throes of a boredom episode, they're struggling to regulate themselves. They're struggling to engage in what neuropsychologists refer to as executive functioning. So this ability to self-regulate is mediated by the front parts of our brain, called the frontal lobes, that actually don't fully mature, fully develop until we get into our 20s. And so it may be that what you're seeing is an increased boredom in the late teen years because there's an increased desire to express oneself, to get out into the world, to explore, but there isn't a corresponding or a complementary maturation of the frontal lobes that would allow for a self-regulation and self-control when one launches into the world. So this is kind of like a biological explanation. And if you buy that kind of explanation, you would tend to, it would stand to reason then that this association between boredom and age may have been with us for quite a long time. The other explanation is more of a sociocultural kind of explanation. So teens are, quite frankly, not given a lot of freedom and choice, but they have a lot of desire for freedom and choice. So we're at that apex, we're at that critical moment of the teens really wanting to step into adulthood, autonomy, make choices, be be autonomous, but society still puts a lot of constraints and limits and hems them in. And we know that constraint, the lack of control, is a big trigger for boredom. And the degree to which a society puts constraints on a young adult is going to vary over time. And I'm not a cultural historian, an expert, but I would imagine that at different points in time or in different cultures, 18, 19, 20-year-olds are given more or less autonomy than they are in our culture. So if you buy this kind of socio-cultural explanation, then you would probably come to the conclusion that the association between boredom and teenage years likely varies across time and across culture.
I have a question here, and if I understand it correctly, the question is there such a thing as a boredom proneness test out there? And if so, would something like this be helpful for individuals to try to understand themselves and maybe find some new ways to respond to kind of like their personality, their character, their situation?
So I didn't quite hear you. Let me just repeat it back to make sure I got it. Is the question...
Is there such a thing as a boredom proneness test that a person can take?
A boredom proneness test. Okay.
And,
yes.
And would this be something that would be sort of psychologically helpful for an individual to try to figure out if they have a certain, proneness to becoming bored, and in what kinds of circumstances?
Yes. So let me say that we do know that certain personality characteristics seem to be risk factors for an increased experience of boredom. Some of them are cognitive factors. So people that have difficulty with attention are more likely to be bored. So for example, ADHD, people with ADHD experience boredom more often than those without ADHD. We know that there are emotional factors. People that struggle to name and identify their emotions are more likely to be bored. And that one may not be obvious, but emotions are like compass points that orient us in life. And if we don't have good facility with our emotions, it's like being at sea without a compass. We kind of get lost and we can't find our way as easily. So then there's also that's cognition, emotion. Then there's self-control, which I've already touched on, right? So people who are struggle to regulate themselves are more likely to be bored. Motivation is another factor. It can be sort of, you can simplify things by saying there's two kinds of people in the world: those that are motivated to maximize pleasure and those that are motivated to minimize pain. So the maximize pleasure people, they're always, here's an opportunity for me to have fun, for enjoyment, and that's what I'm going to go and do. For the minimize pain kind of person, it's like, oh, that might not go well. I might be embarrassed, or there's going to be a lot of traffic. I'm just going to stay home. Well, it turns out that if you're high on either of these, you're more likely to be bored. So the maximize pleasure kind of people, for them, there's dishes that need to be done, mundane activities that need to be completed. And so for them, if they're always looking for that pleasure, they're more likely to be bored. On the flip side, the person who is afraid of or really wanting to avoid problems or pain, they're going to turtle into their shell, maybe be safe, but then become bored. And so motivation is a risk factor there. And finally, biology. Some people are just born kind of, you might say, with a greater need for energy. They need their cup of coffee, they need their excitement in order to be able to focus and pay attention. And so if you have that quality, then you're going to be more prone to boredom. So there are measures of boredom proneness. There's debate in the literature right now, and actually it's an ongoing area for academics because there's some concern that the existing scales have problems. So we're constantly working to revise our measuring tools and refine them. And certainly if somebody was interested, they could find these tools and administer to themselves. There aren't published norms, however. So, if you get a score of 12, you won't really know how to interpret that. What does that mean? Is 12 bad? Is 12 good? Because we don't really have published norms on those measures. Some of us in our labs have administered these scales so often that we have some norms, but they're not really out there in the literature.
Thank you. Now I can see the auditorium from where I'm sitting. Lily, is anyone else willing to step up to mic and ask a question?
Let me just check around. Is there anyone who wants to ask a question? Anyone have a question from the audience? Okay. Well, we'll give people some time to think about their questions on also from their homes and from their classrooms.
Okay. In that case, I think it's a good time to wrap up. Once again, I wanted to thank you, Professor Eastwood. There were some excellent insights, and the conversation we had in the last 10, 12 minutes or so really provided insights that I've, the questions that I've developed in the course of the week. So I'm very appreciative of that. Once again, thank you very much, and goodbye to everybody in the auditorium.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eastwood. It was very interesting.